We have very good news that came out of Israel last night that 4 of the hostages were rescued alive in an operation that's not described in great detail yet, but one of the operations that the world tells Israel not to do, right? Don't do it. Well, she did it and resulted in the rescuing of 4 hostages who are now back home in Israel, receiving medical care and being reunited with their families. Ken Yerbu, may they continue to rescue more and more hostages and arrive at a conclusion in which the hostages are released back to their families, back to their lives. The Torah reading this morning, as we mentioned, is all about numbers, right? So if you're not into census taking and counting, it's not the most interesting parsha of the year. It has almost no narrative in it. But we understand why they did the counting. The Israelites were on the edge of the promised land. They needed to know exactly how many soldiers they had, so they would know how to organize their army and how they would plan their battles. It was an absolute necessity to take the census. But the reason I have trouble with the Sedra is that the same Jewish tradition that tells us to count the Israelite also has passages that warn us against counting the Israelites, against taking a census. So which is right? Are we permitted and even required to count, or are we forbidden to count? Both appear in our very same Torah. So at the end of the book of Samuel, we're told that David is punished for having committed the sin of counting the people. And we're wondering, why can't you count the people? After all, you're a warrior, you need to count. But he's not allowed to count. And in the book of Exodus, in the Sedra of Kitisa, we're told that each person was to bring half a shekel to the Mishkan, and then the half shekel was counted instead of counting the people. So twice we see a hesitancy to count. And you know that if you're a daily minyan and you want to count how many people, we never go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We take a verse that has 10 words in it, right? And we recite the verse. And if we get to the last word, we have a minyan. So even to this day, we still hesitate with counting people. So why don't we count people? There are many guesses. One is the obvious superstition that counting a person endangers him or her because it identifies them to the evil demons, to the Malach HaMavos, the angel of death. That's the superstition. But I'm not a superstition person, I'm a rational person, so I like Rabbi Jack Reamer's explanation. He says the reason you don't count 1, 2, 3 is because we're not 1, 2, 3. Every single person is unique. But when you count them, and you only count that which they have in common, then you can't deal with their individuality because you've turned them into a group. Okay, we have 10, we have a minyan. But everyone in that minyan is very, very different. So we want the minyan, but we want to emphasize the individuality of each person in that religious service. So Rabbi Rima says, the Torah doesn't want us to count because it compromises the uniqueness of each and every person, which was God's intention, to create human beings so each and every one was different, was unique. So here we have 2 attitudes that coexist side by side. The attitude in Bamidbar, which is that it is a mitzvah to count the Israelites. You have to have a census. Moses is commanded to do it. Yet we have the attitude in the book of Samuel and the book of Exodus, and in our custom in our daily minyan, you're not allowed to count Jews. A census is not right. So obviously, contradictions, I say which is correct, but they're both correct. It's just a question of what the circumstances are, and that's what we have to examine. It seems to me that in recent years, Jewish community has gone the way of the book of Bamidbar. Not so much the way of the book of Samuel or Exodus. We spent a lot of money, local Jewish communities, national communities, all over the country, in the effort to determine precisely how many Jews there are in America. And I understand why they do it. If you're on a budget committee, a federation, let's say, and you have to decide whether to invest the community's money in this or that, you have to figure out whether there's a need for this or that. And you only do that by counting people, right? If you count and you find out, oh my goodness, look how many children there are under the age of 5, what should you invest in? Early childhood education. And if you count, you find out that you have a very large number of senior citizens, then you have to invest in programs and buildings that will accommodate and help that population. So you need to count before you can allocate money because you don't know what you're allocating to. So we understand that. So federations have to vote with the book of Numbers. We have to count so we know exactly what we are going to be doing. But on the other hand, I prefer to a certain degree the book of Samuel and the book of Exodus. And maybe counting all the time is not such a good answer. One reason is that demographic studies are not always very accurate. The United States Census is not allowed to ask any questions about religion, so the demographers have to find ways to determine how many Jews there are. Some demographers find out how many children are out of school on Yom Kippur, and they calculate from there. Okay, it doesn't work anymore in Florida because everybody's out on Yom Kippur, but when I was growing out, school was on Yom Kippur, and the Jews didn't come. So count how many didn't come, and you figured out how many Jews there are. Others count how many Jewish-sounding names can be found in a telephone book. Obviously, you don't need a telephone book, you just use a computer. And from the Jewish names, you extrapolate how many Jews there are. Others call a certain percentage of the people at random and interview them. None of these methods are terribly accurate. Another reason I'm not that interested in studies is that they just confirm what we already know. Because all we have to do is look around us. We know that Jews outside the Orthodox world are having fewer children today than ever before. Nobody has to tell us that. We look, we see. We know that many Jews are not involved at all in Jewish life. We know that many Jews are not really identified as Jews. And now we know that too many of our college youth have bought into the lies and distortions being taught about Zionism on the campuses we send them to at great cost. And we're shocked. We're shocked because we kept our heads in the sand while it was happening right before our eyes. Do you need to take a census to know that Hebrew schools and youth groups are in decline around the country? Just look. We see it. Do we need a study to tell us that synagogue membership is down over the previous decades? It's right in front of our eyes. Remember, the rest of the country is not Aventura. Okay? We have to always keep that in mind. The rest of the country is not North Dade. So do we need a study to tell us that most of our Jewish children or grandchildren are marrying much later in life or not even marrying at all? I don't need a study to tell me that. I just look and we see it. But here's the main reason I don't focus on numbers or on demographic studies. It's no longer so simple to decide who to count. Should the Jew who never goes to a synagogue, who never gives to a Jewish cause, who does not give his children any kind of Jewish education, who has no Jewish identification, should that Jew be counted? Technically, I guess, yes, but they're not adding any strength to our community. And maybe he was counted because he happened to be the one who answered the phone on that particular day. How do we count those Jews who believe there shouldn't even be a Jewish state, or those who support Hamas's right to rule in Gaza. Because after all, wasn't Hamas elected? My answer to that, by the way, is Hitler was elected too. We also have to realize that the exact number of Jews in the country means something very different in Israel than it does in the diaspora, than it does in America, for two reasons. One is that in Israel, we now have somewhere around 300,000, maybe more, Russians who are Israelis. But according to the Orthodox interpretation of Jewish law, which in Israel determines your Jewish status, they're not Jews. We don't know how to count them. On the one hand, they are Jewish enough, they're Israeli enough to serve in the army, to risk their lives and literally lose their lives for the country. On the other hand, they're not Jewish enough to marry in Israel or to be buried in a Jewish cemetery in Israel. The demographic study would say they are not Jews. My eyes tell me that they are part of the Jewish people because they are fighting for, dying for the Jewish people and living in the Jewish homeland. They serve Israel. They serve the Jewish people. They die for the Jewish people. And they see themselves part of the Jewish people. So how do we not count them? Yet they're not counted. And numbers count in Israel for another reason. We need to know the exact number of Jews and the exact number of Arabs on both sides of the Green Line. For we have to know which group will eventually constitute the majority in both areas. That determines major, major political decisions. But in America, the question of who's in, who's not in, who's counted, who's not counted, is, oh, I get atmosphere, that's really nice, is much more complicated. We have to go beyond the census. When a Jew achieves fame, for instance, be it in Hollywood or in athletics or in politics, we Jews are very proud. And we're quick to claim, he's one of us. She's one of us. Whenever a Jew achieves notoriety, be it for something good or for something bad, when it's something bad, we're embarrassed. And we try to disown any connection with him or her. That's the first thing we did with Madoff, right? Now, he's not acting like a Jew. That's not part of our community. But in both cases, the person involved may be Jewish only by ancestry or in the public's eye, and not by any other serious criterion. Was Bernie Schwartz still Jewish when he changed his name to Tony Curtis and left all Jewish involvement and Jewish identity? Were Karl Marx or Felix Mendelssohn still Jews after their families converted? Hollywood stars, some of them line up with Hamas. Are they Jews? Michael Douglas, his mother wasn't Jewish. He never converted to Judaism. His dad was Jewish, Kirk Douglas, but so he doesn't count, right? You know where Michael Douglas is now? He's in Israel, visiting in the South where October 7th took place, helping support families there, standing up for the state of Israel, declaring his identification with the Jewish community through his father. But he doesn't get counted. Jews were very excited, we were talking about it before, to hear that the new Mexican president is a Jew. We're not going to be real excited when things unfold. The Mexican Jews didn't vote for her for very good reason. So let's not be too excited that when we take a census, she gets listed as a Jew in the Mexican Jewish census. When it takes a census of who stands with the Jewish people, I don't think she's going to be included. I hope I'm wrong. She's going to cause us probably more embarrassment than pride when it comes to talking about Israel. Orthodox Jews in America won't count the tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of Jewish converts by Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist rabbis. Yet the vast majority of those converts are living Jewish lives, raising Jewish families, supporting Jewish institutions, and supporting Israel. Most of them are in some kind of Jewish school, day school, Hebrew school, Sunday school. Some have become rabbis or cantors. Some lead federations and synagogues, but they don't get counted in a certain kind of census. In our census, boy, do they count. What we see is that deciding who counts and who does not count is not so simple anymore. So what should we do? My suggestion is we should focus and devote our efforts not to determining how many bodies we have that are technically going to be counted as Jews, but rather how many souls we can touch. We should spend maybe a little bit less on demography and more on outreach. Maybe spend a little bit less on determining who belongs and who does not, and spend more creating the kind of Jewish community that people will be drawn to and want to be part of. A vision, a value, an idea, an ideal, a goal, a way of life. These are what are essential to Jewish existence, and they can't be counted in a census. And yet, in the end, what counts in every synagogue and in every organization is not so much how many names there are on a membership list, but that has its import as well, right? So we do count. But rather, how many share the vision and the dream, stand behind it, support it, and push it forward? How many have the values? How many care? How many want this way of life to be transmitted to the next generation? Ask any synagogue leader, and he or she will tell you that one active member who comes, whether it be to services or events or study sessions, one person who volunteers, comes into the office, lends a helping hand, that those people mean more and count more than a long list of paper members who are not really committed. So Bamidbar was right. You need to know how many potential soldiers you have if you're going to war. But Kitisa was right as well. You need to know how many Jews you have who are willing to give that half a shekel to the sanctuary so that they will be counted, whether it be for a literal war that we have in Israel or a spiritual war that we have in the diaspora. And so I vote with the book of Shemot and with the practice of the daily minyan. The doors of the shul and the doors of our hearts must be open to anyone who wants to be counted, anyone who wants to join, anyone who wants to come home. Strength also comes from having friends. They don't have to be Jewish. They can be Judeophiles, those who love the Jewish people and care about the Jewish people. No one stands alone. No groups can stand alone. We have many, many friends, especially here in America. 75% are pro-Israel. We learned a very hard and painful lesson these past 8 months. Many of the people and groups we befriended and thought were our friends not only abandoned us, but even worse, some of them turned against us since October 7th. Many of those who said they were friends, but we distanced ourselves from them because we had disagreements about different issues. But you know, those groups stayed with us anyway, and they stand by us anyway. That's a lesson. Sometimes you can disagree on some important issues, but on the key issues of true friendship and defending each other, you can agree. That's a truer friendship than the ones of convenience. You help me in my issues, but when your issues come up, even your safety and survival, we won't be there for you. So what we count is those who want to be counted and those who say, we are your friends and we stand with you. We count them in the census of the Jewish people as well. If we are to have a Jewish future, we need not so much to just count Jews as we do to create a community, to transmit a heritage to those who decide they wish to be counted as Jews, and to those who wish to be known as the friends of the Jewish people, the friends of Israel, and the friends of freedom. That's who we need to count in the future, so we know how strong we really are. Shabbat Shalom.